A really common thing for Focus on the Family to do is to misidentify the enemy. So they will call divorce the enemy. They will treat divorce as the tragedy, not the marriage-destroying sins that lead to the divorce. Hello, my name is Gretchen Baskerville, and I'm the author of The Life-Saving Divorce. I've been a Christian divorce recovery leader in churches since 1998. So I have heard a lot of stories of Christians who tried so hard, prayed, fasted, gave it all they had, and could not turn around their terrible, destructive marriage. And so, sadly, they needed a life-saving divorce. Now, I want to talk to you about 12 facts that Focus on the Family doesn't tell you about life-saving divorces. Just to make it clear, as Christians, we believe in God's plan for marriage, that it be loving, undefiled, and lifelong. But sometimes it's not loving, it's hate-filled. It's not undefiled, it's full of deceit, full of sexual immorality, addictions, squandering the family money, even abusing the children. And so sometimes God gives us divorce as his merciful rescue plan to save godly Christian spouses who have been trapped in a marriage that is slowly destroying their health and well-being. You know the kind of situations I mean. You've seen the terrible stories of children beaten, humiliated, even killed, or husbands who torment and threaten to murder their wives and often succeed, or a husband who locks his wife into a shed with no plumbing for months, or browbeaten husbands who feel they have no way out but to commit suicide. And they don't want to do that because they don't want to hurt their children. Although we as Christians believe in the sanctity of marriage, we are generally against divorce. We do believe that divorce may be the merciful, life-affirming, and godly option in these cases. Now, believe it or not, Focus on the Family does not condone divorce for cases such as this. They don't condone divorce for domestic violence. On their website, Focus on the Family does not offer divorce as a godly, moral, or right thing to do in domestic violence situations. They don't offer it as God's protection of parents and children. They don't tell you about the Harvard Quarterly Journal article that shows that divorce saves lives. They don't tell you 12 facts about the good side of divorce in these cases. And so I'm going to list them all for you. They're also badly out of touch and out of step because nearly 3 in 4 Protestant pastors and nearly 3 in 4 Americans believe that divorce is morally acceptable where there is abuse. Now, before I show you the positive effects of divorce on kids and parents in these horrifying situations and the conclusions of 30 years of family research, let's talk about Focus on the Family a little bit more. We've already determined that Focus does not condone divorce for physical violence, but they even go one step further. They publish incorrect articles that suggest that divorce is universally detrimental to children and to their parents. Now, I'm going to give you links in the show notes to 2 examples of their poor research with claim-by-claim critiques. You'll discover that they omit facts. They leave out words to change the meaning of quotes, and they distort the findings of the very researchers they chose to quote. In 2020, Focus on the Family published an article written to abused wives, and they told these dear women to avoid anyone who has positive things to say about divorce. And that includes other wives who God has rescued by giving them a life-saving divorce. Think about that for a moment. Focus on the Family does not want anyone, not even an abused wife or husband, to talk to a friend who says anything positive about divorce. So Focus on the Family's ideology is more important to them than a victim's safety or than their children's safety. I hate to say this, but it seems evident, and in my opinion, they really don't mind if you get injured, become suicidal, become depressed, or get killed, as long as you don't divorce. So let's go through the 12 facts that Focus on the Family doesn't tell you on any of their hundreds of web pages or in their broadcasts. Here we go. 12 things Focus on the Family should tell you about divorce, but they don't. Number 1, Focus on the Family doesn't tell you that 30 years of research shows that divorce is actually good for kids on average, where there is abuse, high distress, or high conflict. Some researchers call it high tension. Number 2, Focus on the Family doesn't tell you that making divorce easier to obtain in the 1970s and 1980s saved lives. It reduced the suicide rate for wives by 8 to 16% in states that passed unilateral no-fault divorce. It reduced the domestic violence rate in those states by 30%, and it reduced the homicide rate for wives by 10%. Number 3, Focus on the Family doesn't tell you that divorce resulted in 10 times better well-being for children in those very high conflict homes compared to children whose parents stayed. So staying for the kids may actually endanger the children. Number 4, Focus on the Family doesn't tell you that divorce on average is good for the parents in these highly toxic homes. Those in these miserable, long, often decades-long marriages find that their well-being and health improves on average after divorce. Number 5, Focus doesn't tell you that abuse is so destructive to kids that living 24/7 with a father who displays 3 or more antisocial traits increases the child's likelihood of developing conduct disorders themselves. Number 6, Focus doesn't tell you that children who experienced physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, or observed the abuse of a parent, or lived in a home with substance abuse, mental illness, or criminality, were found to have a higher likelihood of serious health problems in adulthood. Number 7, Focus on the Family doesn't tell you that 7 in 10 Christians report that they are somewhat happy or very happy after divorce. And that's not according to some secular organization. That's according to Baylor. Baylor is the largest Baptist university in the world. Now, number 8, remember the researcher, Dr. Linda Waite, who found that if you stayed in your unhappy marriage, you'd likely be happy 5 years later? Well, Focus on the Family distorts Dr. Waite's findings, and they omit the fact that 1 in 3 couples in Waite's study of these miserable marriages did not get better in 5 years. Which ones? Specifically those in destructive marriages due to domestic violence. Number 9, Focus on the Family quotes Dr. Judith Wallerstein, who wrote the very popular book, The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce, but they don't tell you that she was in favor of divorce in cases of hostile or violent marriages. And she said that 7 in 10 children of divorce turned out average or very well or even outstanding. She told abused spouses not to stay for the kids. Number 10, Focus on the Family doesn't tell you that divorced Christians reported higher well-being than other people after divorce, a full 9 on a 10-point scale of life satisfaction. In my mind, it's very clear. The power of prayer, the power of fellowship, those small group Bible studies, coming around a person and giving them support and encouragement helps them find their joy in the Lord again. Number 11, Focus on the Family gives misinformation about child abuse. This misinformation results in parents believing that if they divorce, their next boyfriend or husband will likely abuse their children. And this is just simply not true. Fewer than 5 in 100 remarriages have child abuse. And while that is still really horrifying, it's better than being in an abusive home. And if I were in an abusive marriage, I wouldn't let 5 in 100 odds stop me from getting a life-saving divorce. Number 12, Focus on the Family doesn't tell you that there are 2 Bible verses that command divorce where there is abuse and neglect. They also don't tell you that God hates divorce is not the traditional translation. For the first 2,100 years of Bible translation, Malachi 2:16 was never interpreted that way. It was always an anti-treachery verse, not an anti-divorce verse. And since the publication of the Dead Sea Scrolls fragment of Malachi, no new major Bible translation has used that God hates divorce wording. Not the New International Version, the 2011 update, the Christian Standard Bible, or the ESV, the English Standard Version. Now, let me give you one more bonus. Focus on the Family doesn't tell you that most children in abusive homes are relieved when their nurturing parent gets away from the destruction, tension, and chaos by getting a life-saving divorce. Now, I'm sorry, I don't have scientific study for this claim, but I did a poll in my 2,000 member private Facebook group, and 8 in 10 of the respondents said that at least one of their children was glad they got divorced. Now, 1 in 10 said their children were opposed to the divorce, and 1 in 10 parents said, well, I just never asked my children. So with that background in mind, let's look at Focus on the Family's brand new video entitled The Effect of Divorce on Children. Hello, my name is Gretchen Baskerville, and I'm the author of The Life-Saving Divorce, Hope for People Leaving Destructive Relationships. I have been a Christian divorce recovery leader in churches since 1998, so I have listened to a lot of heartbreaking stories. One of my interests is where Christians are getting their information on divorce. Are they getting their information from reliable sources that are in touch with scientific research? Or are they just sort of well-meaning but naive and Pollyanna-ish people who really don't understand abuse? So today we're going to look at Focus on the Family's brand new video on divorce and kids. If you were going to do a video on the effects of divorce on children, you would interview someone who was perhaps a child psychologist whose practice focused mainly on children of divorce. Or you might quote several of the family researchers of the past 30 years who specialized in interviewing thousands and following thousands of children of divorce over a period of 10, 20, even 30 years. Or at the very least, you might interview someone who divorced many years ago and has raised children in the aftermath and can give some personal insights. But that's not what Focus on the Family does in this video. None of the people in this discussion have ever been divorced. Not one is a family researcher who has published a peer-reviewed study on the outcomes of children after divorce. And none of them is a child psychologist who specializes in children and divorce. The one person in this discussion who has any deep personal connection with divorce is Dr. John Trent, whose father abandoned his mother while he was still an infant. So I appreciate that he shows genuine empathy toward kids of divorce. When you don't have experts talking about something, you end up making a lot of misstatements or omissions or distortions about children and divorce. So let's get this started. Number one, they claim there's a generational cycle of divorce, and they use that phrase over and over. But the truth is that the majority of children of divorced parents who marry do indeed have lifelong marriages. 60 of 100 kids from two-parent intact homes don't ever divorce, and 53 of 100 kids whose parents do divorce don't divorce either. So there's not a huge difference, at least not anymore as of 2019. Fact number two, Danny Huerta claims that young children show signs of the emotional load of divorce. But what he fails to mention is the work of Dr. Andrew Cherlin, who found that the toxicity in the home affects children's lives and behavior long before a divorce is ever mentioned or ever takes place. It's not the divorce necessarily that damages children. It's also the toxic home. Fact number three, Tim Sanford blames the tension in the home for the children's hurt and injury. And he's partially right, but the tension might be there for a very good reason. Maybe dad is seeing prostitutes. Maybe mom is cheating or addicted to drugs or alcohol. Maybe dad is abusing mom emotionally or physically. Kids sense right from wrong. Fear and tension are valid human emotions in these types of a marriage. If your spouse is cheating with a coworker again, you should feel tension. If you're a wife and your husband hits you or belittles you or criticizes you endlessly, you should feel tension. If you're a man and your wife is vicious to the children, you should feel tension. If you're a wife and your husband just spent the rent and grocery money this month on drugs or gambling or a new motorcycle, you should feel tension. These are signs of very serious problems. And yet Sanford casts the tension itself as the big problem. He even says that the tension between the parents is a form of child abuse and claims that's in Colorado child abuse law. I spent probably 15 minutes. I found Colorado law, but I didn't see that claim. So I wrote to Focus on the Family, and they didn't give me any evidence of this either. Fact four, these guests claim that God hates divorce, but they don't mention that Jesus and Paul allowed for divorce, and that there are 3 places in the Bible where divorce is actually commanded for abuse, neglect, or spiritual adultery, and only one very specific situation where divorce is prohibited, and that's where a rapist cannot marry his victim just to escape criminal consequences and then just dump her in divorce. Look down in the show notes for my explanation of these Bible verses. Fact number 5, Focus on the family just isn't very helpful in categorizing disappointing marriages versus destructive marriages. They just normalize problems by saying marriage is messy or that marriage has a lot of complexities. They don't give examples. So they leave listeners in confusion. How does a person know if theirs is merely messy and normal, or if it's actually affecting their life and sanity, or if they need to get to safety right now? Focus on the family isn't very helpful here. Fact 6, they do say that you can leave and get to safety if there's danger, but it's not forever. In other words, they do not condone divorce in domestic violence situations. How do I know? Focus on the Family does not condone divorce for child abuse or for marital domestic violence because that is what their own official policy says. You will find it on their website or look at the show notes, and I will show you how they have changed their official policy in the last several years, but never do they ever condone divorce for physical violence or chronic emotional abuse, not even the abuse of the children. Number 7, they claim that it's very normal for kids to be angry that their parents are not keeping their marriage vows. But I'll be honest, in 20 years of being a divorce recovery leader in churches, if children knew what the issue was, they're mostly angry at the parent who's the cheater, the drug addict, the pedophile, the drunk, or the abuser, not the one who files to get to safety. In fact, in my private Facebook group, I did a non-scientific poll where 8 in 10 of the respondents said that their children were actually glad or felt that divorce was the best solution in the very difficult, toxic environment they were in. Number 8, Danny Huerta tells the anecdote of a child who is doing well in his view. And what he's looking for as evidence that a child is doing well after divorce is that the child sees both parents as broken and honors both parents. In the anecdote Huerta gives us with this particular child, he describes the marriage as one where the parents just couldn't get along. But as is typical for Focus on the Family, there are no details, no examples given. Maybe there's a very good reason they couldn't get along. Dad spends money on prostitutes or child porn, or mom drinks all day and buys hundreds of dollars of booze each month. We don't know how serious it is. Huerta apparently wants to see that child mutualizing the brokenness and the blame. Now, kids aren't fools. You've been teaching them right from wrong since day one. And half the divorces in the United States are for very serious reasons. This video suggests that the child who blames one parent more than the other might be sinning and not adjusting well. But frankly, if the kids are older, they often know that one parent is doing a lot of marriage destroying behavior and sin. Focus on the Family is promoting something called mutualizing, and they simply don't ever talk about how many divorces are truly life-saving divorces. What this video doesn't express is that children have a lot of love for parents, even messed up parents, even addicted or neglectful parents. But seeing both parents as equally messed up and equally bearing the fault for a life-saving divorce is not a sign of the child doing well. For example, my adult children love their dad, spend time with their dad, but they know exactly why their parents' marriage ended. So Danny Huerta not only plays mind games with the abuse victim, now he's playing mind games with the child too. Number 9, they put the responsibility on the godly spouse to bring health back into the marriage. I mean, I'm sorry, These godly spouses have been trying for years, maybe even decades, and there's only so much one person can do to bring it into health insofar as your own attitudes and your own behavior go. I mean, you can't control the other person and their attitudes and their sinful behavior. You just can't. Number 10, in the video, there's this phrase: it will be so much more helpful to your kids if you decide to go get help. Well, yes, if the problem is just communication skills or problem-solving techniques or conflict resolution, those indeed will help, especially if it's a young couple who, don't have much life experience, have never held a job, they don't know how to make a boss happy, how to interact with coworkers. These kinds of techniques will be very helpful. But if one spouse just loves to sin, is attracted to the forbidden, will try to get away with almost anything while the other one isn't looking, there's really nothing the godly spouse can do. Number 11, this video advocates for something called co-parenting and setting aside your disagreements for the kids' sake. And this is really good advice if you're safe and if your kids are safe from the other parent. If that other parent is not a danger, is not destructive, it is completely good to co-parent. But where there is a dangerous ex-spouse who makes false accusations, threatens you, tells lies, is stalking you, or places weapons in an obvious place like on the counter to intimidate you, you just can't be that naive. You need to take precautions. Instead of co-parenting, you may end up using another technique called parallel parenting, where you don't engage much with the other parent about anything other than the absolute minimum of what the court requires. You see, the landmark Jaffe study, which is in the show notes, shows that if the father has at least 3 of the 7 antisocial traits, he is so destructive to the children that divorce actually provides some protection by removing the children at least part of the time and reducing their likelihood of developing conduct disorders themselves. Again, the Jaffe study summary is in my show notes. Finally, if you're still watching, there is a huge irony in this video. Huerta talks about Dr. John Trent's book and suggests that viewers buy it. It was written more than a decade ago, and rather than breaking the cycle of divorce, which it claims to do, it has actually failed to do so. Trent's own lovely daughter, Carrie, got divorced a few years ago. If you would like to know more about Focus on the Family and what they aren't telling you about the good side of divorce, see the show notes below. Also, if you'd like to see me go through each of their articles, claim by claim, and showing you where they have omitted or distorted or misquoted researchers, that is also in the show notes. Thank you for your time. I pray that you, as a good parent, can watch over and protect your children and keep them safe. Reach out to the Lord. He will never leave you or forsake you. If you benefited from this recording, you will find support and clarity in my book, The Life-Saving Divorce, available in paperback or Kindle on Amazon and in 2022 as an audiobook. You can also follow me, Gretchen Baskerville, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. You can sign up for my email list at lifesavingdivorce.com. Women and men of faith may request to join my private Facebook group, Life-Saving Divorce. For more on life-saving divorces, please subscribe and click the link to the next recording.